What if the greatest turning point in human history wasn't a military victory, but a single desperate act of mercy in the freezing vacuum of space? This is the classified, deeply suppressed true story of Onyx Sterling, a disgraced cargo pilot who pulled a dying alien child from a shattered royal cruiser and paid a price that would alter the fate of two species forever. The official archives of the United Earth Coalition will tell you that first contact with the Aurelian sovereignty was a formalized diplomatic affair orchestrated by politicians in pristine white suits. That is a lie. The real first contact happened in the muddy, asteroid-choked gravity well of a gas giant named Tartarus. On the 14th of October, 2142, Onyx Sterling was not a diplomat. He was a 42-year-old ex-military pilot with a dishonorable discharge, a crippling caffeine addiction, and a rusted Class 4 freighter named the Colorado. His co-pilot, Caleb Reed, was a kid fresh out of the academy who couldn't find a job on a respectable vessel. They were hauling 3,000 tons of refined lithium, a boring, miserable route that paid just enough to keep the ship's life support from failing. "I'm telling you, Onyx, the scopes are ghosting," Caleb said, tapping the cracked glass of the central radar console. "We're reading a massive thermal bloom 3 grid sectors away, but there's no transponder ping. It's gotta be a micrometeorite shower hitting a methane pocket." Onyx leaned over the console, his eyes narrowing. The thermal bloom wasn't erratic, it was pulsing. A rhythmic, fading heartbeat in the dark. "That's not a methane flare, Caleb," Onyx muttered, adjusting the long-range optics. "That's a fusion core venting atmosphere. Someone's ship is bleeding out. Even if it is, protocol dictates we log it and keep moving. We aren't a rescue cutter." Onyx ignored him, his hands already dancing across the flight yoke, disengaging the autopilot. He had spent 10 years in the Coalition Navy watching good people die because bureaucrats strictly followed protocol, rerouting power to the thrusters. Get the med bay prepped. When the Colorado broke through the dense rings of ice and rock, the sight that greeted them defied human comprehension. It wasn't a human pirate skiff or a lost mining rig. It was a vessel of staggering beauty, shaped like a teardrop spun from obsidian and gold, now violently torn in half. Its hull was scored by heavy plasma fire weapons far beyond the payload of any human ship. "Onyx." Caleb's voice trembled over the intercom. "That hull alloy, the design, that's not us. That's them, the Aurelians." The Aurelians were a terrifying myth to the working class of the outer colonies. A fiercely isolationist, technologically supreme species that had vaporized 3 Earth Coalition scout ships a decade prior just for crossing into their territory. They looked strikingly human, though taller, with luminous eyes and an ethereal, intimidating grace. They did not parley. They did not trade. "They're transmitting a localized distress loop," Onyx said, his voice terrifyingly calm as he strapped on his EVA helmet. "Short range only. Whoever hit them wanted them dead, but missed the emergency beacon." "If you go over there and they find you on their ship, they will vaporize us," Caleb pleaded. "If I don't go over there, whoever is breathing that venting oxygen dies in 6 minutes." Onyx cycled the airlock and launched himself into the abyss. The zero-gravity translation was brutal. He navigated through clouds of freezing coolant and jagged shards of golden hull plating. The silence of space was deafening, broken only by the ragged sound of his own breathing. He breached the alien vessel through a blown-out observation deck. Inside, the gravity plating was offline. Floating in the cabin were the bodies of 4 Aurelian guards, clad in ceremonial armor that had been slagged by superheated plasma. Onyx pushed past them, his heart hammering against his ribs. Then he saw her. Trapped beneath a collapsed bulkhead was a child. She appeared no older than 10 by human standards. Her pale skin was bruised, and her silver-white hair floated in a halo around her head. She was wearing a pressurized royal garment, but the seal around her collar was fractured. A thin stream of oxygen was hissing into the vacuum. Her chest barely moved. Onyx didn't think about interstellar war. He didn't think about the Coalition. He thought of a daughter he had lost a decade ago to a colony fever, a memory that still haunted his nightmares. He anchored his boots to the deck, grabbed the heavy hydraulic shear jaws from his tool belt, and wedged them under the bulkhead. With a sickening crunch of alien metal, he levered the debris off the girl. Her eyes fluttered open a brilliant, piercing violet. She looked at him, not with fear, but with profound confusion. A human, a dirty, grease-stained human, risking his life in the graveyard of her protectors. Her suit's pressure gauge flatlined. She began to suffocate, her hands clawing at her throat. Without hesitation, Onyx ripped the emergency rebreather line from his own suit, his only backup oxygen supply, and jammed the universal seal over her fractured collar, manually bypassing her suit's locks. He held her tight against his chest as the Colorado's oxygen flooded her lungs. "I've got you," Onyx whispered over the comms, hoping the tactile vibration of his voice would soothe her. "I've got you. Let's get you home." By the time Onyx carried the unconscious alien child through the Colorado's airlock, alarms were shrieking across the bridge. "Onyx!" Caleb screamed, sprinting down the corridor, his face pale. "Radar just lit up! 3 massive signatures dropping out of slip space right on top of us! Dreadnought class!" Onyx laid the girl on the medbay diagnostic table. "Get us out of here, Caleb. Max burn to Coalition space." "I can't! They've locked us in a tractor beam. We're completely dead in the water." Onyx looked down at the girl. Her breathing had stabilized, the human oxygen mix sustaining her perfectly. She wore a pendant around her neck, a crest of a golden sun eclipsed by a black moon. Onyx knew enough about the whispers of the Outer Rim to know what that crest meant. The royal house. He hadn't just saved an alien child. He had saved the heir to the Aurelian sovereign, and the Aurelian armada had just caught a filthy human scavenger with their princess in his ship. A heavy, metallic thud echoed through the Colorado's hull. The airlock override engaged automatically. The Aurelians weren't asking for permission to board. They were slicing through the security protocols like wet paper. Onyx drew his standard issue sidearm, standing between the medbay door and the unconscious girl. "Caleb, get in the escape pod, now. I'm not leaving you." The medbay doors hissed open. 3 towering Aurelian soldiers stepped into the room, their weapons raised, humming with lethal energy. But they did not fire. They parted, making way for a figure that made the air in the room grow heavy and cold. Queen Isabella of the Aurelian sovereignty. She was imposing, standing nearly 7 feet tall, draped in midnight blue combat robes. Her violet eyes locked onto Onyx, then flicked to the gun in his trembling hand, and finally rested on the child breathing softly on the medical table. "You hold a primitive kinetic weapon at me, human," Isabella's voice echoed in perfect, unaccented English, transmitted directly through a localized translation field. "Yet my daughter's lungs are filled with your ship's air. Explain yourself." Onyx slowly lowered his weapon, though he didn't holster it. "I found her in the wreckage of a scout ship. Her guards were dead. Her suit was compromised. I brought her here to save her life." Isabella stepped forward, ignoring Onyx entirely, and placed a long, elegant hand on the girl's forehead. A soft, bioluminescent glow passed between them. The queen closed her eyes, absorbing the telemetry of what had happened. She saw the truth, the collapsed bulkhead, the human risking his own oxygen supply, the frantic rush to the medbay. When Isabella turned back to Onyx, the hostility in her eyes had been replaced by a heavy, calculating weight. "The attack on her vessel was an internal coup," Isabella stated coldly. "A faction within my own court that believed humanity should be eradicated before you spread further into the stars. They sought to murder my bloodline to ignite a war." She stepped closer to Onyx. "You, a creature from a race we deem barbaric, have shown more honor than my own generals." "Just doing my job, Your Majesty," Onyx muttered, his heart still racing. "Do not insult me with false modesty, Onyx Sterling," Isabella said, reading his ship's registry and his identity in a fraction of a second. "You have bound our fates. In our culture, a life debt of the royal blood cannot be repaid with simple currency." She reached to her own chest and unclasped a small, geometric device. It pulsed with a deep, crimson light. It looked like a mechanical heart wrapped in liquid silver. "This is the Aegis Core," she said, holding it out to him. "It is a symbiotic lattice. It contains the architectural knowledge of our slipspace drives, our medical advancements, and our shield harmonics. It was meant for my daughter when she took the throne. I give it to you." Onyx stared at the device. "I can't take that. That's the keys to your entire civilization." "It is a gift," Isabella commanded, her voice vibrating with authority. "What your species chooses to do with it, will determine if you are worthy of existing in this galaxy. Without warning, she pressed the device into Onyx's chest. Pain, sharp and blinding, ripped through him as the liquid silver burrowed through his flight suit, piercing his skin and weaving directly into his nervous system. He collapsed to his knees, gasping for air as thousands of equations, star charts, and engineering schematics flooded his mind. When Onyx opened his eyes, the Queen had gathered her daughter into her arms. "Live well, Onyx Sterling, and beware your own kind." The Aurelians vanished back to their dreadnoughts, and within seconds the massive ships folded out of reality, leaving the Colorado floating alone in the dark. Onyx staggered to his feet, clutching his chest, where the Aegis core now hummed beneath his skin. "Onyx, are you okay?" Caleb yelled, rushing into the room. "They're gone!" "But, Onyx, we have another problem." The central console pinged wildly. Earth Coalition heavy cruisers. 3 of them, Caleb said, pure panic in his voice. Led by Commander Gregory Hayes. They were tracking the Aurelian energy spikes. "They're hailing us." The comms channel cracked open, and the stern, authoritative voice of Commander Hayes filled the bridge. Onyx looked at Caleb, the newly integrated alien knowledge firing rapidly in his brain. He suddenly understood exactly how the Colorado's primitive engines worked, and more importantly, how to break them beyond their limits. He hadn't just been given a gift. He had been given a curse. The Earth Coalition would dissect him alive to get the knowledge currently fused to his spine. "Caleb," Onyx said, his eyes glowing faintly with a violet hue. "Strap in. We aren't powering down." The bridge of the Colorado bathed in the flashing crimson light of the proximity alarms. Outside the forward viewport, the unmistakable silhouettes of 3 Coalition heavy cruisers eclipsed the stars. Their railgun batteries were already cycling up, the magnetic coils glowing a dull, angry orange. "Onyx! They are locking targeting lasers," Caleb said, his voice dropping an octave as pure survival instinct kicked in. "If we don't cut the fusion drive right now, Hayes will turn us into a cloud of radioactive dust." Onyx didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was drowning in a tempest of geometric light and alien mathematics. The Aegis core, now grafted to his sternum, was actively rewriting his neural pathways. He didn't just understand the Colorado anymore. He could feel its crude, grinding mechanics as an extension of his own nervous system. He lunged for the central engineering console, ignoring the digital interface entirely. He ripped the metal plating off the console, exposing the raw fiber optic bundles and copper relays beneath. "What are you doing?" Caleb yelled, unbuckling his harness to stop him. "The Coalition drive regulators. They cap our plasma output at 40% to prevent a core breach." Onyx growled, his hands moving with terrifying, unnatural precision as he spliced wires together. "But the Aurelian slipspace theorem, it proves thermal degradation is an illusion. It's just a matter of harmonic resonance." "Colorado, this is your final warning," Commander Gregory Hayes barked over the comms, his tone dripping with bureaucratic contempt. "Cut your drives. Boarding shuttles are en route. If you attempt evasion, you will be fired upon." "Hold on to something, kid," Onyx whispered. He didn't use a keyboard. He grabbed 2 live plasma conduits with his bare hands. The Aegis core flared beneath his shirt, sending a pulse of liquid violet energy down his arms and directly into the ship's antiquated mainframe. The Colorado shuddered violently. A sound like tearing metal echoed through the hull as the ancient Class 4 freighter suddenly bypassed every human-engineered safety protocol. The fusion core didn't just ignite, it screamed. On the radar, Caleb watched in stunned silence as the Colorado's energy signature spiked from a sluggish civilian output to a reading that dwarfed the 3 Coalition cruisers combined. "Firing railguns!" Hayes commanded over the open channel, his arrogance replaced by sudden panic. 3 hypervelocity tungsten slugs tore through the vacuum of space, aimed directly at the Colorado's engine block. But Onyx had already calculated the trajectory, the mass of the projectiles, and the gravitational pull of the nearby gas giant in a fraction of a millisecond. He wrenched the flight yoke hard to port while simultaneously dumping raw plasma into the starboard thrusters. The Colorado didn't just turn. It defied the laws of physics, snapping sideways with a sudden burst of speed that sheared off its own communication antennas. The tungsten slugs missed the hull by a matter of meters, burying themselves in the ice rings of Tartarus. "Calculating slipspace fold without a jump gate," Onyx said, blood dripping from his nose. His eyes were entirely illuminated in violet. "You can't jump without a gate! The spatial pressure will crush the hull!" Caleb screamed over the groaning metal. "I can if I fold the space around the ship into a microbubble," Onyx replied coldly. He slammed his fist down on the jury-rigged ignition sequence. Space didn't tear. It warped. The stars stretched into long, blinding lines of white light, and with a thunderous clap that rattled the very atoms of the ship, the Colorado vanished from Sector 4, leaving the Coalition cruisers targeting empty vacuum. When they dropped out of the fold, the ship's power grid immediately collapsed. The emergency lighting kicked on, casting long shadows across the smoking bridge. Caleb threw up in a corner. Onyx collapsed into the pilot's chair, gasping for breath, his hands covered in second-degree burns from the conduits. Where are we?" Caleb coughed, wiping his mouth. Onyx looked at the cracked viewport. Floating ahead of them was a graveyard of decommissioned mining rigs, tethered to a rogue asteroid. Outpost Ouroboros, Black Market Scrapyard. The Coalition doesn't patrol here. Onyx. Caleb pointed at the secondary screen, which was still receiving civilian broadcast waves. The news feed was dominated by a glaring red banner. Terrorist attack in Sector 4. A polished Coalition anchor was speaking solemnly. Authorities are currently hunting the crew of the rogue freighter Colorado, piloted by Onyx Sterling and Caleb Reed. The Coalition Navy reports that these men unprovokedly fired upon a peacekeeping patrol using illegal, highly destructive weaponry, resulting in the deaths of 40 Coalition sailors. A maximum bounty has been issued. Onyx stared at the screen. They hadn't fired a single shot. Commander Hayes was covering up the Aurelian encounter and framing them for the destruction of the scout ship. "We aren't just runners anymore, Caleb," Onyx said quietly, pressing a hand to his burning chest. "We are the most wanted men in the galaxy." Outpost Ouroboros was not on any official Earth Coalition star chart. Tethered to a rogue, ice-covered asteroid on the edge of the Perseus Arm, it was a massive, floating graveyard comprised of decommissioned orbital platforms and hollowed-out military supercarriers. The entire station smelled permanently of scorched ozone, leaking synthetic grease, and the cheap synthetic alcohol favored by the smugglers and deserters who hid there. For 3 days, the Colorado sat concealed deep inside the rusted belly of a dismantled, heavy cruiser. Completely dark, save for a single work light in the cargo bay. Under that harsh, flickering fluorescent bulb, Onyx Sterling was dying. The Aegis core was not designed for human physiology. It was a sovereign royal artifact, engineered to synchronize with an Aurelian's advanced cellular structure. Inside Onyx's chest, the liquid silver lattice was rapidly rewriting his nervous system, burning through his metabolism at a terrifying rate. He had lost 10 pounds in 3 days. He was surviving on direct intravenous drips of raw glucose and military-grade amphetamines scavenged from the ship's medbay. The veins in his neck and forearms pulsed with a faint, bioluminescent violet hue, visible just beneath his pale skin. He hadn't slept. Surrounded by a chaotic mountain of scrap, cannibalized Raytheon Kessler atmospheric stabilizers, old tokamak magnetic containment rings, and gutted plasma rifles, Onyx worked with terrifying, unnatural speed. To Caleb, the pile of parts was useless garbage. To Onyx's augmented brain, it was a symphony of raw potential. "Onyx, you have to stop," Caleb pleaded, his voice cracking as he watched his captain meticulously strip a spool of superconductive copper wire using his bare, blistered hands. "Your core temperature is at 103 degrees. You're having micro-seizures. We can jump out of here. We can head to the deep rim, change our names, and disappear into the mining colonies." Onyx didn't look up. He was currently welding a heavy, magnetic ring to the chassis of a reinforced exosuit arm brace. "The math doesn't work, Caleb. The old Palantir predictive algorithms the Coalition uses for tracking. They will calculate our trajectory within a 94% margin of error. They aren't looking for a ship anymore. They're tracking the isotopic decay of this thing in my chest." "So you're building a bomb?" Caleb asked, backing away nervously. "You're going to blow up the station when they arrive?" "I am not a terrorist," Onyx rasped, his voice sounding metallic and strained. He held up his creation. It was a heavy, mechanized gauntlet, wired to a dense, glowing battery pack the size of a cinder block. This is a localized induction field. Powered by the ambient neural current, the core is forcing through my spine. We cannot run. We have to fight our way to a communication relay. Fight who, Mr. Sterling? A voice echoed smoothly through the cavernous hangar. Caleb jumped, his hand flying to the holster at his hip. Standing at the edge of the light's reach was a man in a tailored, dark charcoal suit. He looked entirely out of place among the rusted scrap, possessing the polished, predatory calm of a corporate executive. Behind him, emerging from the shadows like ghosts, were 6 heavily armed operatives wearing black, unmarked tactical armor, the kind utilized exclusively by deep black intelligence divisions. Agent Echo Croft, the man introduced himself, stepping casually over a pile of discarded conduits. Coalition Internal Security, though my paychecks are technically routed through the legacy accounts of the Vanguard Group. I must admit, Onyx, when Commander Hayes reported that a washed-up freight hauler had managed to execute a slipspace fold without a jump gate, I assumed he was covering for a tactical blunder. But the telemetry we pulled from your wake, it was a masterpiece of applied physics. Onyx slowly pushed himself up from his workbench, slipping his right arm into the heavy, jury-rigged gauntlet. The metal clamped down, locking into his flesh with a hiss of pressurized air. How long have you been watching us, Croft? Long enough to secure the perimeter, Croft smiled, his eyes cold and entirely devoid of empathy. You're bleeding alien radiation, Onyx. We tuned our sensors to a specific harmonic frequency. We've been looking for a reason to escalate our posture against the Aurelian sovereignty for a decade. The Earth Coalition's economy is heavily reliant on the defense sector. Corporations like Lockheed Boeing and the Chen Global Syndicates need a war to justify their planetary strip mining operations. Peace is terribly unprofitable. Caleb's face drained of color. You orchestrated the attack. You funded the sovereign traitors who hit the Queen's ship. You tried to murder an alien child just to spark an interstellar war. We orchestrated progress, son, Croft corrected, adjusting his cuffs. We supplied the rebel faction with classified transit schedules and cloaking tech. It was supposed to be a clean assassination. A tragic internal coup that would spill over into our borders, forcing us to retaliate. But then, Onyx here played the bleeding heart hero. You saved the princess, and the Queen gave you the greatest prize in the galaxy, the Aegis Core. Croft drew a sleek, silver sidearm from his shoulder holster. The weapon whined with an unnatural pitch. I want it, Sterling. If we reverse engineer that lattice, humanity will monopolize slipspace travel and energy shielding for the next 3 centuries. Surrender, and I will ensure your young co-pilot gets a painless execution. Resist, and my men will literally peel you open and carve it out of your ribcage while you are still breathing. Onyx stood his ground. The violet light in his veins surged, illuminating his face. You think you understand what this technology is, Croft? You think it's just bigger guns and faster engines? It's a conscience. It's an unbroken chain of memory. Onyx clenched his fist. The gauntlet on his arm roared to life. A blinding, violet, hard-light shield erupted from the mechanized brace, expanding into a convex barrier that enveloped both him and Caleb. Kill them. Aim for the extremities. I need his torso intact, Croft ordered effortlessly, taking a step back. The 6 Black Ops operatives raised their assault rifles and unleashed a deafening torrent of armor-piercing rounds. The hangar erupted into chaos. The heavy tungsten bullets struck Onyx's shield and instantly flattened, their kinetic energy absorbed by the hard light barrier. The bullets rained down onto the metal floor like useless, flattened coins. Caleb! The dropship! Onyx roared over the thunderous gunfire. Onyx didn't retreat. He advanced. He became a walking, luminous barricade, absorbing the concentrated fire of the strike team as he pushed them back toward the hangar entrance. Every bullet that struck the shield sent a brutal spike of feedback into Onyx's shoulder, but the Aegis Core pumped adrenaline and pain inhibitors directly into his brain. With a vicious twist of his wrist, Onyx inverted the shield's polarity. The vast amount of kinetic energy the shield had just absorbed from the gunfire was violently expelled outward in a devastating, concussive shockwave. The blast hit the operatives like a physical wall. 3 of the soldiers were lifted off their feet and thrown backward, crashing into a stack of steel I-beams with bone-shattering force. Croft's arrogant smile finally vanished. He raised his silver sidearm, a scavenged Aurelian plasma pistol, and fired a single, concentrated bolt of superheated energy. The plasma struck Onyx's shield dead center. The thermal shockwave was catastrophic. The jury-rigged gauntlet screamed, its copper wiring instantly melting from the sheer heat. The shield shattered like glass, and the kinetic blowback dropped Onyx to his knees. His human flesh was blistering, the tech inside him fighting a desperate battle to keep his heart from stopping. "You are a monkey playing with the tools of gods," Sterling, Croft spat, stepping forward to deliver a point-blank execution shot to Onyx's head. Behind Croft, the deafening whine of military-grade thrusters shook the hangar. Caleb had sprinted through the crossfire and breached the Black Ops team's Lockheed Boeing stealth dropship. He didn't know the flight codes, but he didn't need to. He smashed the manual override and slammed the throttle forward. The massive, heavily armored vessel pivoted, its twin rotary cannons swiveling to aim directly at Croft's chest. "Get away from him!" Caleb screamed over the dropship's external PA system. Croft froze. He was a predator, but he wasn't a fool. Realizing he was outgunned by his own vessel, he fired a blind suppression shot toward the cockpit, grabbed the collars of two of his surviving men, and dove for cover behind a massive pile of titanium scrap. Onyx staggered to his feet, coughing violently as he sprinted up the lowering boarding ramp of the dropship. The moment his boots hit the deck, Caleb ripped the ship into the air, tearing through the hangar's rusted doors and accelerating into the freezing void of space. "We got a stealth ship! We actually got a ship!" Caleb yelled, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold the flight yoke. "Where do we go now, Onyx? Give me a coordinate!" Onyx slumped heavily against the bulkhead, his chest heaving, his melted gauntlets smoking against the floor. He looked out the reinforced viewport as the scrapyard shrank into a speck of light. The Aegis core pulsed deep within him, no longer just a database, but a terrifyingly clear strategic compass. "Croft just confessed that Coalition High Command is compromised by private military syndicates," Onyx said, his voice hard as tempered steel, the violet light fading from his eyes to leave a chilling, absolute resolve. "If we run, they hunt us until we die, and they start a war that will extinguish billions of lives to line their pockets." "So what's the play?" Caleb asked, staring at the older man. "We take the fight to them. Set a direct course for Earth," Onyx commanded. "We are going to break into the global broadcast array in Geneva, and we are going to show the entire galaxy exactly what their governments have been doing in the dark." The stolen Black Ops dropship tore through the upper stratosphere, its hull glowing cherry red from the friction of atmospheric re-entry. Below them lay Earth, a glittering jewel of blue and green, blissfully unaware of the apocalyptic shadow hanging over it. Onyx's target was the Global Defense Citadel, a massive subterranean fortress built beneath the ruins of the old United Nations headquarters in Geneva. It was the nerve center of the Earth Coalition's military network, and the only place with a transmission array powerful enough to override the global broadcast grid. "Orbital defense platforms are painting us, Onyx," Caleb said, his hands flying across the dropship's stolen console. "We have maybe 40 seconds before they launch a swarm of anti-air missiles." "Hold your vector," Onyx replied, his voice unnervingly calm. He sat in the co-pilot seat, his hands resting flat against the control panels. The Aegis core beneath his chest was glowing so brightly that violet light shone through his clothes. He didn't just hack the Earth Coalition defense grid, he spoke to it. The Aurelian technology allowed him to see the binary codes of the orbital platforms as crude, simplistic puzzles. He sent a cascading feedback loop through their targeting subroutines. "Missile lock." "Vanished," Caleb breathed, staring at the radar in disbelief. "The automated turrets are tracking us as a flock of migratory birds. You actually blinded them." "I didn't blind them. I convinced them we aren't a threat," Onyx said, blood trickling from his left nostril. The neural toll of interfacing with global mainframes was tearing his human brain apart. "Take us down into the Alps. There's an exhaust vent for the Citadel's geothermal reactors. We go in through the heat sinks." The infiltration was brutal and silent. Landing in a blizzard amidst the jagged peaks, Onyx and Caleb breached the colossal titanium vents. Onyx used the jury-rigged induction gauntlet to absorb the lethal heat of the reactor shafts, creating a safe pocket of air for Caleb to follow. They emerged into the pristine, brightly lit corridors of Sublevel 4, High Command. Alarms instantly shrieked. Red strobe lights bathed the sterile white walls. "They know we're here," Caleb said, unholstering his weapon. "Let them come," Onyx said. "The central broadcast spire is at the end of this sector. Stay behind my shield." A blast door at the far end of the corridor slid open, and a heavily armed platoon of Coalition Marines poured out, led by Commander Gregory Hayes. "Sterling!" Hayes' voice crackled over the internal PA system. You are committing high treason. Stand down, and I promise you a military tribunal instead of a firing squad. Onyx didn't slow his stride. He raised his gauntlet, the hard light shield flaring to life. You framed my crew for the deaths of 40 sailors to cover up your Black Flag operation, Hayes. The tribunal is going to be for you. Open fire, Hayes screamed. The corridor became a meat grinder of kinetic and energy weapons. Onyx stepped forward, an unstoppable juggernaut, the Aegis core feeding him the exact trajectory of every incoming round. He angled his shield, deflecting the fire into the ceiling and the walls, systematically dismantling the structural integrity of the corridor. Caleb provided cover fire, taking out the security cameras and pinning down the Marines. Onyx didn't want to kill human soldiers. They were just following orders, ignorant of the conspiracy. He slammed his gauntlet into the floor, sending a non-lethal concussive wave of electromagnetic energy down the hall. The pulse short-circuited the Marines' powered armor, locking their joints and dropping them to the floor in rigid heaps. Commander Hayes, caught in the blast, fell backward, his rifle sparking uselessly. Onyx marched over Hayes, not even looking down, and kicked open the doors to the central broadcast spire. Inside the massive spherical room, a towering transmission column pulsed with fiber optic data. And waiting for them at the base of the column was Agent Echo Croft. Croft had shed his suit jacket. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing skin that was laced with crude, pulsing cybernetic implants. He held an Aurelian shock blade, a weapon scavenged from the royal wreckage. I have to admit, you have tenacity, Onyx, Croft sneered, twirling the crackling blade. But you can't broadcast anything. I've severed the primary uplink. The only way to send a message now is to manually bridge the core relay. And if you do that, the raw voltage will fry your nervous system in 10 seconds. Watch me, Onyx growled. Croft lunged, moving with unnatural augmented speed. The shock blade hummed as it sliced through the air, aimed directly at Onyx's neck. Onyx brought up his shield, but Croft didn't strike it. He feinted, sliding beneath Onyx's guard and burying a charged kinetic punch into Onyx's ribs. Bones cracked. Onyx stumbled back, gasping. Croft pressed the advantage, a flurry of strikes that pushed Onyx toward the edge of the broadcast platform. You think a garbage hauler deserves the power of a god? Croft spat, bringing the blade down in a heavy, two-handed arc. Onyx didn't block. He dropped his shield entirely, letting Croft's blade plunge into his left shoulder. Croft's eyes widened in shock at the sacrificial move. Before the intelligence agent could pull the blade free, Onyx grabbed Croft by the throat with his right hand. The Aegis core roared. Onyx didn't just channel kinetic energy. He channeled the raw, unfiltered data of the Aurelian slipspace theorem directly into Croft's crude cybernetics. Croft screamed as his stolen augmentations overloaded, short-circuiting violently. Onyx threw the paralyzed agent to the ground, pulling the blade from his own shoulder with a grimace. "Caleb! The console!" Onyx yelled, staggering toward the massive fiber optic column. "Onyx! You heard him! You can't bridge the relay! It's 50 terabytes of data a second and 1,000,000 volts. It will kill you, Caleb pleaded. If I don't do this, millions die in a war based on a lie. Onyx ripped open the maintenance panel on the column, exposing a massive bundle of severed, sparking transmission cables. He didn't use a keyboard. He jammed his bare, bleeding hands directly into the live cables. The pain was absolute. It felt as though a star had ignited inside his skull. The Earth Coalition network violently resisted the intrusion, bombarding his nervous system with lethal electrical feedback. But the Aegis core met the resistance, adapting, shielding his vital organs, and turning Onyx's own body into a quantum router. Every television, every military HUD, every civilian datapad, and every billboard across the Earth Coalition suddenly went black. Then, an image appeared. It wasn't Onyx's face. It was the visual telemetry downloaded directly from the Aegis core. The entire galaxy watched the unedited, raw truth. They saw the Aurelian royal cruiser peacefully navigating the gas giant. They saw the Black Ops stealth ships, funded by Croft and Hayes, ambush the vessel. They saw Onyx, a simple human cargo pilot, pull a dying alien child from the wreckage, risking his own life to save hers. And then, the ultimate twist of the Aegis core revealed itself. The device wasn't just a database. It was a quantum entanglement communicator. As Onyx forced the broadcast across human space, the core simultaneously broadcast a beacon back to the Aurelian sovereignty. The skies over Geneva darkened. The alarms of the Citadel screamed as a spatial tear ripped open the atmosphere directly above the Swiss Alps. A fleet of Aurelian dreadnoughts, sleek and terrifying, dropped into Earth's orbit. But they didn't fire. A localized transmission overrode the Citadel's comms. It was Queen Isabella. The doors to the broadcast spire burst open again. This time, it wasn't Hayes's men. It was General Thomas Briggs, a decorated Old Guard coalition commander flanked by heavily armed military police. They had seen the broadcast. They saw Croft twitching on the floor, and Hayes tied up in the hallway. "Secure this room! Put Agent Croft in irons!" General Briggs barked. He looked at Onyx, who was collapsed against the transmission column, his skin pale and glowing softly. General Briggs slowly walked over to Onyx, pulling a medical kit from his belt. "Son, you just prevented the extinction of the human race, and you gave us the stars." 2 years later, the political landscape of the galaxy had been unrecognizable. The trials of Croft, Hayes, and their co-conspirators were broadcast across 2 empires, dismantling the corrupt military-industrial complex of the Earth Coalition. Caleb Reed, the kid who couldn't find a respectable job, was now the youngest captain in the newly formed Coalition Aurelian Diplomatic Fleet, commanding a vessel that blended human durability with alien slipspace tech. As for Onyx Sterling, he could never go back to hauling lithium. The Aegis Corps had fundamentally altered his DNA, making him something entirely new, a bridge between humanity and the sovereignty. He lived on Aurelia Prime, serving as Earth's first official ambassador. He often walked the golden gardens of the royal palace, drinking terribly synthesized human coffee. Sometimes, a young alien princess with silver-white hair and violet eyes would run up to him, showing him her studies, completely unaware of the political gravity she held. She just knew him as the man who breathed life into her when the universe had left her to die. A single act of mercy in the freezing dark had saved 2 civilizations, proving that the true measure of a species isn't the power of its weapons, but the courage of its compassion. If Onyx Sterling's classified sacrifice left you breathless, hit that like button and share this video with fellow truth seekers. The galaxy is full of hidden histories they don't want you to know. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a deep dive into the universe's greatest suppressed secrets. What would you have done in Onyx's place? Drop a comment below and let's discuss.